Why did Nintendo choose not to include native on-system voice chat on the Nintendo Switch? In this video, as I look back on Nintendo's past attempts at in-game communication, I'm going to address that question and shed some light on Nintendo's relationship with voice chat. First, let's cast our minds back to the rollout of Nintendo Switch Online, and the reasons Nintendo ascribed to the approach they took throughout the generation. When the Switch launched back in March 2017, it was capable of online multiplayer from day one, but lacked any kind of voice chat or communication functionality. At the time, Nintendo's online play was entirely free to access, as it had been in previous generations. Launch titles like Super Bomberman R and Fast RMX included online multiplayer, which was available at no additional charge back then. The same held true for first-party games that followed later that same year, like Mario Kart 8 Deluxe on the 28th of April 2017. Then, in July 2017, players got a taste of what was to come from their impending online subscription service known as Nintendo Switch Online. This new service of theirs promised access to legacy Nintendo games and voice chat. However, this voice chat would not be included natively on the Switch as some had hoped. Instead, it would be handled via an external app for smartphone devices accessible to players with a Nintendo account, a direction that proved controversial among fans and media alike. In an interview with Nintendo Everything from January 2017, Nintendo of America's then president Reggie Fils-aime provided the following justification for their approach, quote, "Instead of having some sort of bulky gamer headset, you'll be able to do it right off your smartphone. Put in the earbuds that you use for your standard mobile device. We think that's a pretty sweet solution." End quote. He would go on to reiterate this talking point to IGN, quote, "We want to reinforce the capability to take your experience with you on the go. The ability to do matchmaking, voice chat through your phone. It's a hell of a lot more convenient than having a gamer headset stuck into your backpack trying to do that. That's why we're doing it the way we are. We see the convenience, we see the ease of delivery. We think it's going to lead to a better experience." End quote. This rationale would garner its share of criticism from members of the press, such as Forbes contributor Paul Tassi, who called Fils-aime's statements wildly out of touch, saying, quote, "The idea that you would have to voice chat through Nintendo's app alone on your phone seems nothing short of ridiculous. Obviously, there are a million other ways you could chat to your friends on your phone, like Skype or Discord, which do not cost a monthly subscription fee." End quote. The smartphone app was released on the 21st of July 2017 for iOS and Android devices. Splatoon 2, which launched alongside it, was the first game to take advantage of it. This voice chat solution became a common source of criticism among reviewers at the time. Callie Plaguey, writing for GameSpot, said that it was, quote, "inelegant at best and ridiculous for a modern team-based game. There's no good reason it couldn't have been included in-game." End quote. As they rolled out the Switch Online app, Nintendo also advertised some Splatoon-branded headphones from Hori. This was a wired headset with a microphone that could be plugged into a squid-shaped audio splitter, which could then be connected to both a mobile device and Nintendo Switch simultaneously via 2 additional wires. Compatible with games like Splatoon 2, this arrangement allowed players to communicate over voice chat in the Switch Online app on their phone, while also hearing the audio from their Switch. Due to its complex nature, the setup, and this infographic in particular, quickly became a source of ridicule online. Nintendo Life, for instance, dubbed it a wired nightmare. Numerous commentators made the observation that Nintendo advertising this contradicted Reggie Fils-aime's earlier statements, deriding the notion of voice chat through a bulky gamer headset. Originally, Nintendo had planned for the Switch Online mobile app to become available exclusively for members of a paid Switch Online subscription in late 2017, following a free trial window for early adopters. However, this premium service was delayed all the way until September 2018, and Nintendo extended that free grace period for all of its online features until this time. A few weeks after their paid Switch Online subscription finally arrived, Reggie Fils-aime fielded questions at Seattle's GeekWire Summit in October 2018. There he commented again on Nintendo Switch Online and conceded that their chosen setup for voice chat on Switch was not in line with what their audience had wanted.
What's interesting is, again, the Nintendo approach is to do things differently. It's a much different suite of services than our competitors offer. And we deliver these experiences in a different way. And so, it creates a yin and a yang for our consumers in that they see what we're doing and they're excited about the cloud save and the legacy content, but they wish that we might deliver, for example, voice chat a different way.
It's worth noting that Nintendo had done on-system voice chat before, many times in fact. They first attempted this all the way back in 2006 on the Nintendo DS. In Metroid Prime Hunters, players were able to voice chat with friends in lobbies before and after matches using the handheld's built-in microphone. A number of other DS games would go on to include this functionality, including Pokemon Diamond and Pearl and Custom Robo Arena. What's more is that Nintendo even released their own first-party headset for the DS that was compatible with these games. In 2008, they released a voice chat peripheral for the Nintendo Wii known as Wii Speak. This device was intended to sit alongside TV sets and allow multiple people to speak into it from across the room as they talk to their friends over the internet without anyone needing a headset. As well as being supported by a small selection of games like Animal Crossing City Folk and The Conduit, an application called the Wii Speak channel was available to download in which users could hold group calls with their friends. Voice chat was less emphasized by Nintendo on the Wii successor, the Wii U, although the system did feature video calling in an app called Wii U Chat. Using the gamepad's built-in microphone and front-facing camera, players could communicate with friends and had the option of drawing on the screen, doodling around their friends with various effects. Wii U Chat, however, could not be used in tandem with other software, and only very select games on the console supported voice chat in-game. Super Smash Bros. For Wii U was a rare example of Nintendo implementing it, where it was available during private lobbies by speaking into the gamepad. A small number of third-party releases on the system allowed you to talk with friends, including Assassin's Creed 3, Ninja Gaiden 3, and the Call of Duty games, although none of these titles allowed you to use the gamepad's microphone for it. A separate accessory, such as a microphone headset, was required in order to chat, which could be connected via the gamepad's headphone jack. One third-party offering that did support the gamepad's microphone for in-game communication was 2015's Minecraft Wii U edition, something incidentally that was notably absent when Minecraft came to the Switch about 2 years later. The 3DS, on the other hand, also had a few games that supported online voice chat with friends, such as Pokemon X and Y, which used the mic built into the system. Nintendo's focus on native voice chat and investment into this tech gradually lessened throughout the Wii U and 3DS generation, culminating with a blackout period on the Switch. Then, with the introduction of Nintendo Switch 2, they did a total 180. They brought back on-system communication in the form of game chat, accessible by the push of a dedicated C button. Not only is this enabled voice chat with friends while games are running, it is also allowed for screen sharing and video chat for those with a compatible USB-C webcam. It has marked such a departure from their previous efforts that it begs the question, why the turnaround? We can mine at least a partial answer to all this from comments made by Nintendo producer Koichi Kawamoto. In 2025, he took part in a roundtable discussion on Switch 2 where he touched on the creation of game chat and why they didn't include native voice chat on the first Switch. Quote, Nintendo Switch supports voice chat via the Nintendo Switch Online smartphone app, but we originally wanted to include it as a feature of the console itself. However, with the Switch console's processing capability, it was difficult to implement a voice chat feature without affecting games, so we decided to offer it via a smart device. With Switch 2, we were able to include it as a standard feature of the device. Finally, 8 years after Nintendo's initial explanation, they provided a more substantive answer than some of their earlier spin. But that's not the full story. To fully make sense of this, we need to go back to the 8th of October 2010. On this day, US President Barack Obama signed into law the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act of 2010, also known as the CVAA. This bill was introduced in order to increase accessibility to modern telecommunications for people with disabilities. It presented a sweeping overhaul of how technology and media companies catered towards people with accessibility needs. This had some big implications for developers of internet voice communication software. Title 1 of the Act reads, requires advanced communication services and products to be accessible by people with disabilities. Essentially, if a company operating within the US market had an internet voice chat service, then they were required by law to make it accessible to people of varying sight, speech, motor, cognitive, and hearing ability. This included, crucially, voice chat on video game consoles. Shortly after the CVAA came into effect, however, the video game industry was temporarily made exempt from it. The Entertainment Software Association, or ESA, a trade union group that represents America's video game publishers, submitted a request to the government body responsible for the act, the Federal Communications Commission, in March 2012. They asked the FCC to grant the games industry an exemption from the Act for a period of at least 8 years, which would have lasted until the 8th of October 2021. This included video game consoles, game software, game distribution and online services, and peripherals. In theory, this would give game companies plenty of time to invest in and prepare solutions that would render their services more accessible. The FCC granted them a waiver in October 2012, but it lasted for only a fraction of what they had asked for, just 3 years. In 2018, the FCC's Karen Pelt-Strauss spoke to members of the industry at the Game Accessibility Conference about why the waiver was granted. Quote, "The industry wasn't where you are now. There were a lot of accessibility challenges, and we wanted to give the industry a chance to apply the knowledge gained in making advanced communication services. We wanted to give the industry a chance to take that practical information and apply it to gaming, and there is a theory at the Commission that we don't want to impede innovation. So we felt, we'll grant waivers and give the industry a chance to work through these various issues through the waiver period." The original 2012 waiver covered game consoles, game distribution, and game software. Before it was due to expire in October 2015, the FCC agreed to extend the waiver, but for only 15 months, and this time it would only cover game software. From this point forward, game consoles and other categories would have to comply with the Act. The exemption for game software was extended 2 more times after 2015. In 2016, they granted an extension of 1 year and did the same again in 2017. Eventually, the game industry's exemption from the CVAA finally expired on the 31st of December 2018, at which point all companies it was applicable to had to comply with it. There are many nuances to the CVAA that mean that certain exceptions could still be made, such as for small businesses, but what's important to understand for the purposes of this video is how it affected Nintendo. As mentioned previously, the Act compels businesses offering voice chat services in the US to make them accessible to people with accessibility needs, such as those with limited sight or hearing. The exemption for game software that was initially granted in 2015 and later extended twice, according to the FCC, included game applications that are built into operating system software. This meant that voice chat software built into the operating system of a device released within the waiver period would not have to meet the accessibility requirements of the Act. In 2015, around this time, Nintendo was preparing their next console, the Nintendo Switch. However, they had no assurances that the 2015 waiver would still be in place when the Switch released. As I said before, the waiver for game software was eventually extended by 1 year on 2 separate occasions, but Nintendo had no guarantee that would happen. They had to continue developing the Switch under the assumption that its operating system would be subject to it in the event the FCC did not continue extending the waiver. According to former employees, Nintendo was well aware of all this and had been monitoring the situation closely. After all, they were one of the companies represented by the ESA who had successfully lobbied the FCC to grant them the aforementioned waivers. In mapping out their next console, they were taking into consideration their responsibility to deliver a voice chat suite that would be usable by those with accessibility needs. In order to meet those standards, as outlined by the FCC, it was determined that major new features would be required. One of these was text-to-speech, whereby users would have written messages read to them out loud by the device. Another was speech-to-text, in which words spoken in voice chat would be transcribed on screen. These 2 options were intended to provide a greater level of accessibility for those with limited sight and hearing. Internally, Nintendo staff explored the possibility of adding these to the Nintendo Switch alongside full on-system voice chat during planning on the console. The 2 features would have functioned in tandem with voice chat on top of other software like games. Ultimately, these explorations proved short-lived. There were apparently some concerns about having all of these features while maintaining a level of efficiency on the system. If not implemented correctly, the services could have restricted the resources available to developers and impaired the user experience. Nintendo had available to them a more cost-effective and less risky solution, which was an application for smartphones. The company was at the time ramping up its entry into the world of mobile apps. 2016 saw them launching Miitomo, for example, a social networking app from some of the Tomodachi Life developers. Pokemon Go and Super Mario Run followed later that year. Creating a mobile app dedicated to Nintendo Switch Online and its voice chat service fit within this wider strategy and allowed them to offer the necessary accessibility options outlined by the CVAA, since these were already built into modern smartphone devices. It was, for them, a simpler alternative that was cheaper, more efficient, and involved less risk from a development standpoint. When the Nintendo Switch released in March 2017, its operating system software was technically covered by the FCC's final waiver for game software. So had Nintendo wanted to disregard their responsibility towards making their voice chat more accessible, they legally could have, and released voice chat software without those features, but they chose not to. They chose to make it a priority and do it on smartphones instead. While some audiences weren't happy with this outcome, one party that was pleased with Nintendo's approach was the FCC. In a December 2017 hearing, they cited Splatoon 2 specifically as a positive example of steps being made by the industry to make communication in games more accessible. Quote, Nintendo recently released a free mobile application for smartphones that provides near real-time voice chat functionality for people playing its Splatoon 2 game. According to ESA, because this matchmaking feature uses a smart device application for player-to-player communications, it can take advantage of a number of built-in accessibility resources provided natively on these platforms. End quote. Having said all of this, this is not to say that the Nintendo Switch couldn't somehow handle voice chat, or even voice chat with the aforementioned accessibility features. It's not as simple as that, and in fact, a third-party company did release an on-system voice chat solution for it. When Fortnite came to the Switch in 2018, it was updated with built-in voice chat that could be used by plugging a microphoned audio device into the Switch's headphone jack. It even had cross-platform support, allowing Switch players to communicate with people on other systems as well. This voice chat software was developed by a company called Vivox, and was subsequently licensed to other developers for use in their Switch games. It appeared in titles such as Paladins, Dauntless, and DC Universe Online. In 2025, I spoke to Adam Rosenfield, a software developer who worked at Vivox on their voice chat application for the Switch. According to him, the Switch could handle voice chat alongside games without any issues, and the software he developed used a mere 10% of the console's memory. On top of that, Rosenfield told me that it was more than capable of running it with accessibility features like speech-to-text and/or text-to-speech enabled. Overwatch 2 is one such game to support these features on the original Switch. It has a text chat that can be read aloud by a synthesized voice when enabled.
Do what the man says.
The game purports to offer speech-to-text as well for transcribing voice chat, although I wasn't able to get it to function in the tests I conducted. It's worth noting that Vivox runs inside games on the Switch. It isn't a part of its operating system like a Nintendo-made on-system solution could have been. Had Nintendo taken that approach with Switch, then the amount of resources it would need to devote to the operating system would have been greater, and could have presented some restrictions for developers. Although Nintendo chose a different path for the Switch, they did, as I mentioned before, bring back native voice chat with its successor. The Switch 2 introduced game chat, including the previously discussed accessibility features, speech-to-text, and text-to-speech. During game chat, users can have their written messages read aloud by a synthesized voice, or bring up real-time transcription at any time. This is all built into the Switch 2's OS and can be used alongside games. A considerable 3GB of the Switch 2's 12GB total of RAM was dedicated to its operating system as of launch, a large increase over the 800MB of memory that was reserved for the OS on the original Switch. A significant amount of the operating system reserved on the Switch 2 is for game chat. According to Digital Foundry, Nintendo even created a testing tool for developers to simulate the strain game chat takes on the Switch 2's hardware while running games. In their Ask the Developers discussion, it was mentioned by senior members of Nintendo that there was a certain amount of disagreement internally over the memory allotment. Quote, When deciding on game chat's features and which of those demands we could meet, we had to be careful, as devoting too much processing power to game chat would affect how much is left over for games. Fortunately or unfortunately, we had a group of fussy software developers who were very vocal with us, so we were able to strike a good balance. I think our company has a workplace culture where developers can devote themselves to creating uniquely Nintendo products because they don't hold back when sharing their opinions with us." End quote. All of this might offer us some insight into the decision Nintendo made with the original Switch. One of the sources I spoke to who was involved back then told me that while the resource allocation was their primary concern, they believe there could have been some other issues that played a role. Quote, "Although whilst I'm sure that was one of the reasons, there were probably also other concerns as well, such as child safety and Nintendo's liability, concerns of costs involved in having to host a service for speech-to-text, etc." End quote. Either way, Nintendo evidently came around on that in the end. Game chat on Switch 2 in many ways represents a culmination of their previous attempts over the generations. It recalls the noise filtering technology of WeSpeak, the video calls of WeChat U, and of course the voice chat they first tested out on the DS. Now with some key options like speech transcription, these features have been rendered more accessible than in the past. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more videos just like this one. If you'd like to support my work and allow me to keep making more of these, check me out on Patreon at patreon.com/Liam Robertson, just like these kind people did.